Shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome to the Ahavah Fellowship YouTube channel. I'm Pastor Garry, and if ever you're in the Birmingham area, why not contact us? We would be delighted to be your host on a Shabbat. If you haven't already subscribed, why not click on the like and subscribe button to stay connected with our ministry? And don't forget the notification button so you'll be aware of new content when it arrives. In this message, I'll be concluding my teaching on the very sensitive subject of the ethnicity of the Bible. In part 1, I presented biblically cited and authoritative literature from established and recognized Jewish historians, evidencing the fact that today's Jewish people are not actually Jews, or Hebrews for that matter. In fact, their origins are not even Shemitic. I dispel the notion that salvation is based on skin color and ethnicity, but rather it's purely the free gift of the Messiah. I presented using anthropological and archaeological data as to the ethnicity of the chosen people. Starting from Adam all the way through to the apostles of the New Testament are evidenced in Scripture as people of color. The most famous apostle, Paul, according to the Scripture, suffered a case of mistaken identity and was almost arrested because of his resemblance to a black Egyptian terrorist. It's a good thing he didn't live in the United States. We know what would have happened to him. Finally, we even have Scripture proving the ethnic look of the Messiah himself. His feet as burnt brass and white woolly afro-type hair. In this episode, we answer the lingering question: if the Jewish people are not the true Hebrews of the Bible, then how did they get into the land of Israel? Moreover, how the ethnicity of the Bible was changed. So without further delay and introduction, let's begin. To change history, which is of course impossible, you only simply need to alter people's perception of it. The sheer scale of artistic portrayals of the Messiah and his disciples done during the European Renaissance period of the 14th to 17th century shaped the minds of believers in the Bible for hundreds of years to come. It would be Heinrich Ibsen who coined this phrase, "A picture is worth 1,000 words." Under the influence of Vatican Rome and various popes who commissioned such artists as Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, they would create and shape the face of the Messiah and his disciples that would go on to then influence other artists around the world, and eventually in the 20th century, movies and films. The depiction of Christ and his disciples has been steered by the Renaissance period. Beneath the catacombs of St. Domitilla in Italy, some astonishing discoveries have come to light. Portrayals of the Messiah and his disciples, believed to be the oldest known depictions of them to date. But what's astonishing about these images is that they portray what would be termed as black men with dark skin and afro-type hair. Discovered in the 15th century, these images could well date back to the first Christian believers in Rome. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who represents the Church of England, had this to say, that the church should reconsider its portrayal of Jesus as a white man. The proverbial jewel in the crown is not that this is some elaborate plan hatched by globalists. This plan has its origins in Yeshua himself. For it is he who determined that the children of Israel would be scattered to the four corners of the world, and that their homeland would be occupied by people seeking their identity, posing themselves as the biblical Israelites. In part 1, revealed just how all this is written in prophecy, and the best bit is the remnant of true Israel are provoked to jealousy by someone taking their name, identity, Torah, customs, and traditions, and even their land. This is the master plan of Yeshua himself, to awaken his children and summon them to Shema and assume their true calling and rightful place in him first, and then he will determine who stays in the land. And now that Yahuwah has given the land to a people who are technically Gentiles, now for the next act of poetic justice, he will provoke Israel to jealousy over their own inheritance and covenant.
Legend becomes a living reality, and on the 5th of Iyar, May the 14th, 1948, 44 years after Herzl's death, David Ben-Gurion proclaims the founding of the State of Israel in Palestine. With the proclamation of the state, the gates are thrown open, and among the ships carrying tens of thousands of immigrants from Europe and the East sails the Theodor Herzl.
Right before the very eyes of an onlooking world, prophecy has been fulfilled. The descendants of Japheth, Ashkenaz, are given the land of Israel by royal decree. It was just as Yahuwah had determined in the aforementioned prophecies. Many, having fallen for the lie of Zionism, have given the land to Gentiles. But how did this all happen? Just when did this transaction come about? For that, we need to go back to the Second World War to discover how this all came about, and just maybe we'll see a little more into the Father's plan to provoke his chosen people to jealousy.
Give us free!
Next up, the Second World War, and an Antichrist figure named Adolf Hitler. Several years ago, I did a teaching on the Antichrist, tracing the biblical history of some of the major players throughout the biblical narrative. In the 20th century, many names appear who wholly meet the criteria of an Antichrist, none more so than Adolf Hitler. One thing is clear from a study of Scripture, that Antichrist is not any one person, but is a spirit, and therefore can even be in several individuals at any one time. The spirit of Antichrist can manifest throughout history in a person or persons, indeed, even an entire nation, sadly, as history has already proven, even to the extent of entire nations. We have to acknowledge, before I go into this message, the war effort of the Second World War, dating between 1939 and 1945, between the Allied forces and the Axis powers. But meanwhile, a darker and more insidious and secret plan of ethnic cleansing was being rolled out across Europe, something that even the Allied forces themselves were not prepared for. This was not just a war between European states, but in fact a war that would involve every member of the human race. Men and women, black as well as white, were enlisted to fight representing their nations. This war would exact a very heavy price from many people groups hailing from every nationality on the globe. Not only Europeans and Americans, and not just men, but countless women became key players in the war effort. The legendary Tuskegee aircrew fighter bomber escort team oversaw the protection of over 200 missions of bombers into the airspace of the Axis powers, losing only 25 bombers over 5 years. These men were true heroes in history. We should never forget their tremendous sacrifices and contribution to the war effort. These guys are true legends indeed. Another group of peoples that deserve mention are the Gurkhas of Nepal, known for their unique fighting weapon, the kukri, were a fierce and formidable fighting force against the Japanese, who had allied themselves with the Nazis. One Gurkha was reported to have fought 200 Japanese troops with a bolt-action rifle. Certainly, without the expertise of their warriors, truly the war would have gone very differently in the area of the Pacific, as Britain had no warriors to match the elite Gurkhas, who were specialists in what we now term as guerrilla warfare. The cost of war is always gargantuan. World War II took 60 to 80 million lives, compared to World War I that took 17 million lives, and 20 million were wounded as a result. While the world was gripped and ravaged by war, a more sinister and gruesome story was unraveling that the Allied forces could no longer ignore, as they were so desperately trying to turn a blind eye to it. The horror of war was only the tip of the iceberg. Soon they would be introduced to a depravity that would defy even the limits of the human imagination. The world, let alone trained soldiers of war, were not prepared, nor could they be, for the atrocity of the Nazi concentration camps. Camps like Dachau, that detained over 188,000 prisoners of the Nazi Party. People from every ethnic group and background across Europe, even large numbers of blacks, were held in these FEMA-like camp conditions, awaiting a sentence for being deemed, quote-unquote, enemies of the state. Their only crime was not meeting the approval of the new Nazi Party ideologies, the price for which they would pay with their lives. On record, 41,500 lives were lost, many of which were of black origin. Belzec concentration camp, where over 600,000 people lost their lives, Jews and non-Jews. Treblinka, another concentration camp that took the lives of over 800,000 men, women, and children. The infamous Auschwitz took over 1,100,000 men and women and children, an awful price to pay for simply being of a different ethnicity. The entrance of Auschwitz serves as a spine-chilling reminder that the gates of hell are ready to consume this world if we fail to recognize we are one human race. Unless we have love one to another, indifference is inevitable. It becomes increasingly difficult to see ourselves as my brother's keeper. Then, when desensitized in our humanity, man will rise up against his brother and strike him down in cold blood. However, this comfort and hope remains. As it is written, the gates of hell shall not prevail. And elsewhere, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. This is a mass grave of detainees at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, or should I say extermination camp, that were non-Aryan. In other words, Poles, Soviets, Dutch, Czechs, Germans, Austrians, and peoples of Negroid persuasion and Jews. 120,000 were detained there and 50,000 were killed. As I said earlier, the Nazis did not only go after Jews alone, but other people groups as well. It was not going to end with the Jews. The Nazis were intolerant to other ethnicities. While Jews were the primary victims, the Nazis also targeted other groups for persecution and murder. The Nazis claimed that Roma, people with disabilities, Some Slavonic peoples, especially Poles and Russians, black people were considered biologically inferior. The regime persecuted other groups because of politics, ideology, or behavior. These groups included communists, socialists, even Jehovah's Witnesses, gay men, and people the Nazis called asocials and professional criminals. The Holocaust was Nazi Germany's deliberate, organized, state-sponsored persecution and machine-like murder of approximately 6 million European Jews and at least 5 million prisoners of war. Romani, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and other victims, as I said before. The word Holocaust is quite interesting. Holocaust is a Greek word in origin, and it means burnt offering. It would not be too much of a stretch of the imagination or the theological mind to perceive all what was going on as a sacrifice to gods, or the ideal of gods, a sacrifice to demons, human sacrifice, which is the worst kind of sacrifice possible because it breaks the commandment, thou shalt not murder. But this was a genocide that would rid the earth of the creation of the Most High. The estimated total number of people who were murdered in these 6 Nazi extermination camps is 2.7 million, according to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Many heinous crimes against humanity that were not caught on camera. Many of these names will go nameless, but they shall not be forgotten. An uncommon fact of World War II is that Nazi Germany did not just construct 23 extermination camps, but in actual fact, 44,000 were constructed. What was done to the Jewish people of Germany and Poland was a genocide that will never be forgotten. But there were many other ethnic groups as well that were caught up in this atrocity, and they don't get the attention that they deserve. The atrocity of dehumanization is something Black people are all too familiar with. Our people for hundreds of years have suffered deep scars from the impact of losing our homelands, identity, culture, and dignity, only to reclaim them in foreign lands. Estimates place the loss of souls from tens of millions to well over 500 million, dating throughout the period of the transatlantic slave trade and beyond. So Black people more than sympathize with the Jewish people, we empathize. The only difference is there was no reparations or homeland waiting for us. Winston Churchill paraphrased George Santayana with these words: "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." The Federal Emergency Management Agency is an agency of the United States Department of Homeland Security, initially created under President Jimmy Carter by Presidential Reorganization Plan in 1978. England, China, Russia, and Korea, among other countries, are among many nations poised to throw its own citizens into such concentration camps if they are deemed as an enemy of the state or unfit to be a citizen. Alex Jones and Jesse Ventura and others have exposed the FEMA camp's plan to have millions of biological coffins produced and held waiting. What are they waiting for, I ask? A global pandemic that will kill millions through a biological agent? The Wizard of Oz is a film I regard with many happy and fond memories. It stars Judy Garland, who, when a tornado rips through her home in Kansas, Dorothy, played by Judy Garland, and her dog Toto are whisked away to a magical land of Oz. They follow the yellow brick road toward the Emerald City to enlist the help of the wizard, the only one who can get them home. But to their eventual surprise, they discover all is not quite what it appears to be, and someone has been deceiving the masses. While the world is paying attention to the main act, is anyone really paying attention to what's going on backstage? We need to pull the veil back while the Second World War, and indeed I would like to go back even to the First World War, but I won't, there were powers in control of both wars, powers orchestrating these wars. And this is not conspiracy theory, this is conspiracy. But don't just rely on my own words. For the remainder of this presentation, I will intersperse information for you all, but I will also draw in and enlist the help of others who have made documentaries and provided information on this said subject. Guttel Snapper Rothschild was the wife of Mayer Amschel Rothschild, and together they founded the Rothschild dynasty. Their 5 sons spread out over Europe, creating branches of the family banking system in Frankfurt, Naples, Vienna, London, and Paris. She had this to say: "If my sons did not want war, there would be none." Wow, what a statement from someone who was inside and is the matriarch of the Rothschild family. Nathan Meyer Rothschild would go on to say this: "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." Wow. Next, I would like to share with you the research done by Professor Walter Veit, a well-known Christian teacher and preacher of the gospel, and what he discovered when he looked into the same subject that I'm sharing with you all now.
But they claim they want to build the temple. Now, I want to discuss a little bit of sensitive history. And if I go to sensitive history, well, then I must quote sources that say it rather than that I say it. This is a fascinating book, and the web pages are there. You can check it out. Facts are facts. This is a book that was written by a Jewish man. And he confronted the thinking of many of the high-placed individuals of the world. This is interesting stuff. In this book, Benjamin H. Friedman, a Jewish man, writes about the Jews and reveals an interesting history. He states that the present Jews in Palestine are not the true descendants of the Judeans, but rather descendants of the Khazars. In the letter addressed to D. David Goldstein of Boston, Massachusetts, a convert to Catholicism, the author, Benjamin Friedman of New York City, dated October 1954, provides some fascinating insights. This is in the public domain. Let's study this for a while and see where we get. Benjamin H. Friedman claims that the word Jew was only introduced into the English language in the 18th century, and that Jesus referred to himself as a Judean and not as a Jew. Inscribed upon the cross when Jesus was crucified were the Latin words Iesus Nazarenus Rex Iodeorum, which means Jesus of Nazareth, ruler of the Judeans. Now this is fascinating. I went and checked it, and it is so. Yes, it happens to be so. Now the word Jew today has a religious as well as a political connotation. You think of a Jewish entity, a government, but you also think of their religion incorporated at the same time, whereas the term Judean is a geographic connotation. It's a geographic. It doesn't incorporate the religion. It's where he came from. He was from Judah. He was a Judean. He further writes, the form of religious worship known as Pharisaism in Judea in the time of Jesus was a religious practice based exclusively upon the Talmud. The Talmud in the time of Jesus was the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all rolled into one, of those who practiced Pharisaism. The Talmud today occupies the same relative position with respect to those who profess Judaism. So the rituals and rites that many of them observed were based on the Talmud and not on the Torah. Rabbi Morris, this is all from the source. Rabbi Morris in Kurtzer wrote a most revealing and comprehensive article with the title, "What is a Jew?" which was published as a feature article in Look magazine in June 17, 1952 issue. In that article, Rabbi Morris Kurtzer evaluated the significance of the Talmud to Judaism today. In that illuminating treatise and that important subject, by the most qualified authority at the time, Rabbi Morris N. Kurtzer stated, "The Talmud consists of 63 books of legal, ethical, and historical writings of the ancient rabbis. It was edited 5 centuries after the birth of Jesus. It is a compendium of law and lore. It is the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law, and it is, note, the textbook used in the training of rabbis." So rabbis are trained according to the Talmud. And the Talmud has very little in common with the Bible. Then he states, "From the birth of Jesus until this day, there have never been recorded more vicious and vile, libelous blasphemies of Jesus or Christians and the Christian faith by anyone, anywhere, or any time than you will find between the covers of the infamous 63 books, which are the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law as well as the textbook used in the training of rabbis." I don't want to go into it. If I were to put the quotes on the screen, which the Talmud contains about Jesus, you would be horrified. It is some of the vilest statements that I have ever had the dishonor of reading. And this is what their training consists of. He then proceeds to quote some of the most horrendous statements from the Talmud regarding ethical issues, and not only regarding ethical issues, which deal with many, many issues from economics to relations with women, etc., and, of course, the view on Christ. As to the origin of the present Jews in Palestine, he states that those Jews derived from Eastern Europe, and many, many of the Jews that today live in the reconstituted state of Israel come from Eastern Europe, are not descendants of the Judeans or the lost tribes of Israel, but rather descendants of the Khazars. Who were they? They were a nation most people do not even know of. He writes, "The so-called self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe in modern history cannot legitimately point to a single ancient ancestor who ever set even a foot on the soil of Palestine in the era of Bible history. Research also revealed that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe were never Semites, are not Semites now, nor can they ever be regarded as Semites at any future time by any stretch of the imagination. What secret, mysterious power has been able for countless generations to keep the origin and the history of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom out of the history textbooks? Did you ever learn about it at school? I never learned about it. And out of classroom courses in history throughout the world, the origin and the history of Khazars and the Khazar kingdom are certainly incontestable historical facts. You have to do some cross-checking. Even the Jewish Encyclopedia is quite explicit about it. This was the Khazar kingdom. Here is the Black Sea, the Byzantine Empire. Here was Persia. And here was the kingdom of the Khazars. It was a massive kingdom. Now let's look at some of this interesting history. The Khazars were an Asiatic nation. And the Jewish Encyclopedia states Persian origin that converted to Talmudic Judaism. Now, obviously, some of the rabbis involved there could have been Judeans and probably were Judean descendants, but their converts are not Judeans. And that had conquered a vast area of Eastern Europe, which was in turn later conquered by the Russians in the 10th and 13th century. So that is why there are so many Russian Jews. Have you ever thought where they came from? Did they escape from Palestine? Were they the lost 10 tribes? Did they emigrate to Russia? No. This is a totally different nation that accepted Talmudic Judaism. He writes, after a historic session with representatives of the three monotheistic religions, King Bulan, 7th century, decided against Christian and Islam, because Islam had just arisen, and selected as the future state religion the religious worship then known as Talmudism, and not known and practiced as Judaism, which was totally different, which was based on the Bible. They adopted the Hebrew alphabet, and the Khazars adapted words to their requirements from the German, the Slavonic, and the Baltic languages. This language was known as Yiddish. And Yiddish used the Hebrew alphabetic characters, but not Hebrew. It's not Hebrew. It's Yiddish. I've always wondered, when I hear them speaking Yiddish, I understand quite a few words. Why? Because I'm German. They had many exchanges with universities and their students were trained. So here is another nation which had occupied this area, and they had adopted this religion and brought rabbis in and trained the people, but they were not Judean. Now let's jump to today. In accordance to this history, the religion of the modern state of Israel is based on Kabbalistic and Talmudic traditions and is far removed from the biblical worship of Yahweh. And if it is based on the Talmud, it is so anti-Jesus Christ that it belies understanding. And here we have, in March 2006, while visiting Yeshiva University at Brooklyn, New York, a Jewish institute dedicated to the study of the what? Talmud. We have Cardinal Kasper. Who's Cardinal Kasper? Cardinal Kasper is the cardinal associated with ecumenism. They are honoring the Talmud together. You see, behind the scenes, there is a pact. Because I, as a Christian, can sympathize with every other religion, but I cannot embrace a religion that speaks evil of Jesus Christ. Nor can I have a union with such a religion. Because can two walk together lest they be agreed? Now let's get back to the Napoleonic society and see what happened further. Napoleon established both the Bank of France, we saw that, the French Bourse, the stock exchange, as well as the National Department of Tax Boards. Do we have all of those systems of governments in the world today, yes or no? Yes, we do. And we have the same system of economics today, yes or no? Yes. The world is run by the stock exchange. To ensure equitable taxation for all, consequently the income of the French peasants skyrocketed. Think tanks and research centers were established in France to work on projects vital for national economy. So a totally new economic order evolved. Who started these organizations? We will have to see. Who runs the secret societies today and the secret organizations? Who started them? Who is the instigator? Who's the boss behind the scenes? We will have to see. And maybe we'll get a different picture of what's happening in the world. An industrial board was organized to provide data and information to French industry, as exemplified by the success of the sugar beet farming and the canning industry. In the military, Napoleon pioneered in what we describe today as the principles of war. And did you know that these principles, the armies of today, are based on the organization created by Napoleon for his Grand Army, and it has been used ever since. Who controls these armies?
Very good question. Who controls these armies? In fact, that question should extend. Who controls the banking systems? And as Rothschild said himself, whoever controls the money controls any monarchies or any governments in position. So the Rothschild family is notorious throughout the years, even said so by their own family members, their own women. But there's much more to be uncovered about this family and their activities. And they're not the only bloodline family. There are other, as we call them, Illuminati bloodline families. But this particular family is one I pay some interest in this presentation. There'd be another teaching just to cover the other bloodlines. But let's take a deeper look into the activities and some more of the background of the Rothschild family, and to see what connection they have with this teaching on the ethnicity of the people of the Bible.
We cannot underestimate the power of the Rothschilds. Not only are they in money, in gold mining in South Africa, they've got all kind of corporations.
What is your view of the Freemasonry and the Illuminati? How do they fit into the picture?
Well, the Illuminati are the Rothschilds. You look at the Knesset and the Supreme Court building. These two buildings in Israel were built by the Rothschilds. Now, the Supreme Court building has Illuminati symbols all over the place.
What is the role of the non-Jews in the elites? I mean. What
is the role? Okay, you have your Gentiles called the Rockefellers. Now, they are tied in intimately with the Rothschilds. Rockefellers and the Rothschilds work very closely together. And this began in the late 1800s when Rockefeller had Standard Oil, and the Rothschilds were just getting into the oil business in the Caucasus with Baku oil, and they were competitors. But then Rothschild, who's the conniver, he found a way to unite with the Rockefellers. So they were no longer competitors. So this is when the Rockefeller-Rothschild connection began, in the late 1800s. And it was all about oil, and it was all about big, international, worldwide money. So you have these two Gentile, you have the Gentile Rockefeller and you have the Jew Rothschilds working together for money. So wherever you see Gentiles hooked in with the Jews, it's all about money. J.P. Morgan, he works also very closely with the Rothschilds and in their bank, and you see the Federal Reserve is funding his takeover of this bank that he just bought. I forget the name of it, but they work together.
All the Hollywood stars that seem to have a piece of the action, how do they fit in? Do you have a theory about that?
Well, anybody in Hollywood is owned by Jews. Jews run Hollywood. Everyone knows that. So everyone's beholden to Jews. So if you want to get ahead in as a movie star or a television figure, you've got to kowtow to the Jews. It's the same with a politician.
I want you to be perfectly clear. I mean, I'm born Jewish, and I know my family's Jewish, and they don't know anything about this scheme, about the New World Order. They think people who talk about it are crazy. And I think that's true of what percentage of Jews are aware of this agenda. I mean, there may be this collective guilt for Christ, but is there this collective guilt for this agenda? Wouldn't you say it's only insofar as they support the agenda?
I'll tell you what every Jew does know. Every Jew knows that the Jews run the media. We all know it. I knew it growing up. We all know that Jews run Hollywood. And before I became a Christian, I used to tell my friends, hey, you want to get the biased propaganda? Go to a movie.
The Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s. Reuters then bought the Associated Press. which selects and delivers the same news stories to the entire world, day after day. They have controlling interest in 3 major television networks and easily avoid media attention since they own it. Until recently, they owned and operated England's Royal Mint and continue to be the gold agent for the Bank of England, which they also direct. They also fix the world price of gold on a daily basis and profit from its ups and downs. Over the centuries, the Rothschilds have amassed trillions of dollars worth of gold bullion in their subterranean vaults and have cornered the world's gold supply. They own controlling interest in the world's largest oil company, Royal Dutch Shell. They operate phony charities and offshore banking services where the wealth of the black nobility and the Vatican is hidden in secret accounts at Rothschild Swiss banks, trusts, and holding companies. Although Evelyn Rothschild looks like a harmless gray-haired old man, make no mistake about it, Rothschild and his ancestors have handpicked presidents, crashed stock markets, bankrupted nations, orchestrated wars, and sponsored the mass murder and impoverishment of millions. With British Prime Minister Lloyd George up against a wall, Lionel Rothschild and the Jewish Zionists offered the British a deal they couldn't refuse. "We'll bring the United States into the war as your ally and win the war for you," they said, "if you'll promise us Palestine." In April of 1917, President Wilson got the green light and declared war on Germany. In return, the British government wrote the famous Balfour Declaration and addressed it to none other than Lord Lionel Rothschild. The declaration promised Palestine and Israel to the Rothschild Zionists.
1817, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine by the Earl of Balfour, a policy endorsed by Woodrow Wilson and by the League of Nations, which made Palestine a British mandate.
That is something that the people in the United States have never been told. They never knew why we went into World War I. The Balfour Declaration was merely Great Britain's promise to pay the Zionists what they had agreed upon as a consideration for getting the United States into the war. When the war was ended, and the Germans went to Paris, to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, when they were cutting up Germany and parceling out Europe to all these nations that claimed a right to a certain part of European territory, the Jews said, "How about Palestine for us?" And they produced, for the first time, to the knowledge of Germans, this Balfour Declaration. So the Germans, for the first time, realized, oh, that was the game. That's why the United States came into the war. And the Germans, for the first time, realized that they were defeated. They suffered this terrific reparations that was slapped onto them because the Zionists wanted Palestine, and they were determined to get it at any cost. When the Germans realized this, they naturally resented it. Up to that time, the Jews had never been better off in any country in the world than they had been in Germany. The Jews were doing very well in Germany. No question about that. Now, the Germans felt, well, that was quite a sellout. We've been so nice to them, and from 1905 on, when the first communist revolution in Russia failed, and the Jews had to scramble out of Russia, they all went to Germany, and Germany gave them refuge, and they were treated very nicely. And here, they sold Germany down the river for no reason at all, other than they wanted Palestine as a so-called Jewish common.
I have joining me today Dr. and Rabbi Marvin Antelman. Welcome to the show, Rabbi.
Thank you very much for having me here. First of all, let me say this. There are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I'm not interested in theories. I'm interested in facts. So the scholarship over the years that I've utilized are sources that are impeccable. A man by the name of Shabbat Tzvi, who was born in 1626 and died in 1676, came along and said, I am the Messiah. And he had a tremendous following. When it was realized that his following was so great, there would be problems, the Sultan gave Shabtai a choice. Either you die or convert to Islam. So he converted. Now, there were about 1 million followers prior to the conversion. When the conversion happened, then there was disillusionment among the Jews. But there were some diehard people who set up different cults of Shabtai Tzvi. And the worst one of them was called the Domeh, which was a secret organization. And the Domeh was based in Turkey and in Salonika. And the Domeh gave rise to these terrible orgies that went on, which became part of the immorality theology of Shabtai Tzvi, corrupted later on. He apostatized himself 10 years before his death. So when he died in 1676, he had these cults doing all kinds of evil.
And the reason that these followers of Shabtai Tzvi were doing evil was because what?
Here's the thing. The Talmud says that the Messiah would come when everybody's good or everybody's bad. There is such a saying in the Talmud. So the Sabbatians said like this: it's impossible for everybody to be good, it's easy to be bad. So they turned around the Torah and they said, if you do an evil deed, then you will use up the energy of the universe, and it'll collapse, and you'll force Messiah to come because you will have used up all the evil in the world. So whenever they engage in an orgy, they would make a bracha, and every day they would figure out a way to do as many sins as possible. Like if you eat chaylev, you're chayav karet. In other words, if you eat fat, according to the Torah, you're to be excommunicated from your people. So they would eat fat that was prohibited, non-kosher fat, from a kosher animal, which is chaylev, which is in that category, like eating blood from a kosher animal.
So they would dafka do the opposite.
They do the opposite
in order to hasten the
coming of the Messiah. After Shabtai Tzvi died, one of the most powerful Sabbatian cults, as they were called, was a transformation of the Domeh, the most extreme cult, to Europe through an insidious person by the name of Jacob Frank. He died in 1791. Now the Frankists started to spread and take over entire communities and make them satanic. And you can actually trace a line historically, which I do in my book, to the CFR from Shabtai Tzvi, and another organization called the Illuminati, which was founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. And they were involved also in the French Revolution, which is also well documented.
So what you're saying is that there really does exist a new world order, that it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy.
Right, and Professor Katz wrote a book called The Jews and Freemasonry, which gives a history of the interface between Jews and some of the cults that derived out of Shabtai Tzvi. But the next big cult that came from Shabtai Tzvi after the Domeh organization, which was in Turkey, the next big cult were the Frankists, as I mentioned with Jacob Frank. So Jacob Frank, the Vad Arba Ratzat, the Council of Four Lands, wanted to deal with Frank, and they decided to have a big excommunication on the 20th of Sivan 250 years ago. And there they made the following rulings. They said everybody that is a Frankist is to be excommunicated.
From the Jewish people?
From the Jewish people, bastards to the 10th generation, is what it said. And they prohibited people, because the Frankists were into Kabbalah, they prohibited the study of Kabbalah until you were 30 or 40 years old and you had a belly full, as they said, full of Talmud. Only then could you study the Kabbalah.
Right.
And they said their women are whores, and they're hereby excommunicated from our people to the 10th generation.
This is what the Council of Four Lands labeled the Frankists, right, because they so deviated from Judaism and all that Judaism holds to be true and righteous. These people went off and made basically their own deformed religion, and so the Jews wanted nothing to do with them. They kicked them out.
That is correct.
Okay. Are there non-Jews that joined this Sabbatian cult?
No, non-Jews did not join the Sabbatian cult, but the non-Jews did join the Illuminati.
New World Order, Mr. Rothschild.
Right.
New World Order. Depopulation. Oh, listen, who are you...
Genocide?
Who are you televising for?
Rockefellers, come back. We don't want your New World Order. You know?
We just want to let you know the New World Order has no legitimacy. And that we as a people are not afraid, and we are waking up to the robber barons and the big banksters who are looting this economy with the Federal Reserve.
Well...
What do you, I mean, the Rothschilds family did start the Federal, they divided Europe first, took over Europe with Napoleon.
Here we have some symbols long associated with the Rothschild family. Indeed, Zumrotenchild is Germanic, meaning with red sign. This oftentimes would be with a red cross or a red shield, as you'll notice on the Rothschild family crest. Broken down to a raw English format, the name would mean child of wrath. On the right, you see a very familiar symbol, and this symbol would go on to become the symbol for a very popular nation. Indeed, the nation of Israel. So indeed, the Rothschild family symbol became the symbol for the nation of Israel. If you've watched part 1 through to part 4 of my series, Who Are the Jews?, I give an extensive history as to how the Jewish people procured the land that is now called Israel, modern-day Palestine. So Elohim turned away from them and gave them over to worship the stars, as has been written in the book of the prophets. People of Israel, it was not to me that you offered slaughtered animals and sacrifices for 40 years in the wilderness. No, you carried the tent of Molech and the star of your god, Rephan, the idols you made so that you could worship them. Therefore, I will send you into exile beyond Babel. Stiff-necked people with uncircumcised hearts and ears, you continually oppose the Ruach HaKodesh. You do the same things your fathers did. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? They killed those who told in advance about the coming of the Zaddik. And now you have become his betrayers and murderers. You who received the Torah as having been delivered by angels, but did not keep it. Acts 7, verse 41 to 43, 51 to 53. This symbol is widely known through occult circles, but more commonly known as the flag of Israel. If you remove the horizontal bar, you are left with this symbol, which is the basis for this symbol. The T-square and compass, with the G representing the great architect and the all-seeing eye referring to Satan. This symbol is recognized all over the world as a symbol for Freemasonry. Notice the seal of the Grand Lodge of the State of Israel. Freemasonry encompasses the three main monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, all coexisting with Freemasonry. When drawn symmetrically, it symbolized the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below. The Lorraine cross is used in Freemasonry as a degree symbol, of which there are many degrees within Freemasonry. Islam and the dove, the phoenix of Christianity, Judaism and Zionism, all are united. The following is a quote taken from Albert Pike, who is a Grand Master within Freemasonry and is the author of Morals and Dogma. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agent of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then, everywhere, the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization. And the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. These are Albert Pike's own words of how Freemasonry will serve to prepare the way for the Antichrist. And the state of Israel, this Zionist state, will be the catalyst for this move. Hence why we see so much uproar about the state of Israel. And all of this is being spearheaded, financed, and planned by the Rothschild family. Let's take a look at something called the Balfour Treaty. The Balfour Declaration was a single paragraph in a letter dated 2nd of November 1917 from the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour to Walter Rothschild, 2nd Baron Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community, for transmission to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain and England. And this is what the letter states. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Unfortunately, the area highlighted in this letter was not upheld. It clearly stated that it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. What would follow would be a spate of extermination of the indigenous Palestinian groups. But that is something I cover in my series, Who Are the Jews? So what was the 1917 Balfour Declaration really all about? The British believed the Zionists had an extreme and significantly powerful influence throughout the internal infrastructures of Russia and the United States of America, and therefore could use that power to convince those governments to join the war effort. At the same time, Britain was afraid Germany or France might make a commitment to the Zionists. In part 1 of this series, I shared with you 3 authors, all of them Jewish, and these books are literally smoking guns into dismantling the lie of the Jewish people. Indeed, Shlomo Sand's book, The Invention of the Jewish People, is a must-read. Benjamin H. Friedman's book, Facts Are Facts, and Arthur Koestler's 13th Tribe are significant books that unveil and reveal the truth about today's Jewish people. And I highly recommend these books for those of you who are investigating and researching this subject matter. A quote from Benjamin H. Friedman: as Christians learn how self-styled Jews have spent millions of dollars to manufacture the Jewish myth for Christian consumption, and that they have done this for economic and political advantage, you will see a tremendous explosion against the Jews. Right-thinking Jewish leaders are worried about this, since they already see it coming. Wow. When he was asked about peace in the Middle East, the late president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, stated, "The Jews will never be able to live in peace because they left here black but came back white." Another book on the actual subject of the land of Israel and the way that it's being carved up by Shlomo Sands is The Invention of the Land of Israel, From Holy Land to Homeland. Another quote, this time by Voltaire, "To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize." It's interesting that whenever I teach on this subject or others speak on this subject, it's not long before someone comes out saying you're anti-Semite without even looking at the facts. Why is it that many Jews in the city of London and New York and other countries around the world are ardent protesters against Zionism, claiming that Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism? In fact, saying they are diametrically opposed, and Zionism is the cause of Middle Eastern bloodshed, and that Zionists are actually warmongers. And this is by the Jewish community in the United Kingdom, in Australia, New Zealand, and also South Africa and New York. John Pilgrim, Australian journalist and writer, has this to say: "The version of history you were taught in school was heavily revised to favor your own nation's agenda while hiding its crimes, and in doing so fostered an unrealistic sense of false patriotism used to manufacture your allegiance to a corporate entity masquerading as your government." Numerous operations were carried out by the Israeli government in the 80s and 90s to help the diaspora of the children of Israel in Ethiopia to return home. Operation Moses, Shlomo, and Yosef, and others. However, Ethiopians have found, after returning back to the land of Israel, their homeland, they have encountered extreme racism at the hands of the Jewish people. In fact, there have been whistleblowers who have brought it to light that many of the Ethiopian women are being forcibly sterilized by the Jewish government upon entry into absorption camps. Abuse, violence has been tolerated by the Ethiopian community for far too many years, and there are numerous anti-racism rallies being conducted in Israel. How is this when, as a nation or as a people, the Jewish people themselves still remember very much the effects of the Holocaust against their own peoples? Mayer Amschel Rothschild, which I mentioned earlier on, who is the founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty, it is they that own Israel. After the infamous Balfour Declaration of 1917, they are behind today's massacre of the Palestinians and the reshaping and carving up of the land and its borders. Why does Hasatan want Israel so bad? Psalm 147, verse 19 to 20. He reveals his words to Yaakov, his laws and rulings to Israel. He has not done this for other nations. They do not know his rulings. Hallelujah. Psalm 89, verse 15. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Grace and truth attend you. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 16. For now I have chosen and consecrated this house, so that my name can be there forever. My eyes and heart will always be there. The nation, and indeed the people of Israel, and the land of Israel, has an eternal covenant with it and with them. And the people of Israel, the rightful owners of the land, Father is restoring and will restore them to the land of Israel. His words are forever perpetual, and his covenant with his friend Abraham still exists to this day. He promised Abraham that land to his descendants, and Yahuwah is seeing to it that his children are being provoked to jealousy and they will once again covet the laws and the rulings that were theirs. And once they return to the Torah, return to their Mashiach, the favor of Yah will be restored in the land, and ultimately the land will be restored to its glory. So, Genesis chapter 15, the land is deeded to Abraham and his descendants. 2 Samuel 24-25, King David purchased the land of Jerusalem, or the city of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 32, verse 9, Jeremiah who purchased the answer to prayer, Anathoth. 1 John chapter 4, verses 1-7. Dear friends, don't trust every spirit. On the contrary, test the spirits to see whether they are from Elohim, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Here is how you recognize the spirit of Yahuwah. Every spirit which acknowledges that Yeshua the Messiah came as a human being is from Yahuwah or Elohim. And every spirit which does not acknowledge Yeshua is not from Elohim. In fact, this is the spirit of anti-Messiah. You have heard that he is coming. Well, he's here now in the world already. I submit to you, not what I'm saying, but what the apostle, what the elder is saying, that anyone who professes to be in the land but rejects Yeshua or Yahushua as the Mashiach is indeed an antichrist. They are not the people of Elohim. Many would believe that, oh, they'll convert. And I'm not denying that many have come to faith. But as was clarified earlier, as I've shared from myself and others have bear witness that I've included in this presentation, that the people who are responsible for teaching in these yeshivas, the basic training is to read the Talmud and renounce and reject, in fact, reject Yeshua as being the Messiah. In fact, there are blasphemies and heresies said about Yeshua, his mother and his father, etc. So what we see now is a fulfillment of prophecy that Antichrist is here now, already in the world, already in the land. Well, I certainly enjoyed delivering the conclusion to this message. If you haven't already, why not subscribe to the Ahavah Fellowship YouTube channel and check out my series, Who Are the Jewish People? Well, that's enough from me on this one. Until next time, Shalom.